So my story begins on August the 10th, 2014. And on that day, I flew to Seattle. I went to Seattle to attend a reading of a new musical theater production, which was being performed on that day before a small invited audience. I flew home the next morning. When I arrived back in Toronto, I went through the customs and proceeded on to the exit. Now, to get out of the airport in Toronto, everybody has to go down the same escalator to the baggage claim area one flight below. When I got to the top of the escalator, I heard a woman's voice screaming, "Stop the escalator! Push the button! Stop the escalator!" I looked around, found the button, pushed it, and ran down the stairs where I found a body lying at the foot of the stairs, face down, motionless. A security guard and I turned him over, and what I found was a man in his 50s who was blue. He had no pulse, he wasn't breathing, he was dead. I looked to the right, I looked to the left, and I realized it was my turn to start CPR. I turned to the security guard and I said, "Do you have an automatic defibrillator here?" We connected him. Now, these machines are very simple to use. You're not allowed to look at the rhythm strip, so you can make no decisions. A woman's voice tells you when to stand back because she is about to shock the patient. This happened 6 times. We occasionally felt a weak pulse, but he only had agonal respirations and he was purple. 20 minutes later, the EMS crew arrived. They intubated him immediately, and to my surprise, albeit shock, he pinked up, he had a good pulse, he had a blood pressure of 150 over something, and he was alive. I could see from the rhythm strip he was in atrial fibrillation with a variable rate, but that didn't much matter. I said, "Go, get to the hospital." The next day, I proceeded with my follow-up. I phoned the ambulance service in Toronto, and they said to me, well, in the ambulance, he was seen to have an ST elevation MI, and they took him to the hospital with the closest cath lab. I phoned that hospital. I was immediately connected to the cardiologist on call, who turned out to be a former medical student and resident of mine. He said, "Oh yeah, that guy's amazing. He actually had suffered an acute occlusion of his left main coronary artery, a condition that is almost always fatal. But he was able to stent him, and he had good blood pressure, good hemodynamics. He actually woke up and was following commands, although he was still intubated when he left him, and he wasn't sure if his mental status was normal." He said to me, "You must have done very good CPR." I did. He was transferred to the CCU under the care of yet another one of my former residents, ultimately went to a rehab center, and was discharged home. Now, there are 3 reasons why I'm telling you this story here tonight. The first one is obvious. In that moment in time, I had a chance to use my medical training, albeit training that every citizen now has, to save someone's life. And I've never won the Nobel Prize, I've never won the Masters, but I'm not sure there was a better feeling than the one that I had on that day. If I ever win the Nobel Prize, I will let you know. And if you've ever golfed with me, you know the Masters is just not happening. The second reason I'm telling you the story is that on that day, I felt connected to the literally thousands of people who, in my mind, also saved that man's life. The first set is obvious, the people who participated directly in his patient care. The EMS staff, the cardiologists, the nurses in the CCU, the rehab physicians and physiatrists and physiotherapists who were able to get him back home. They obviously contributed. But there are many, many, many more people in this story. There are the people who figured out that rapid defibrillation in out-of-hospital cardiac arrest actually helps patients, and who implemented widespread dissemination of the equipment so that one was actually there at the time I needed it, or he needed it. There are also the people who figured out that stenting a patient is the right thing to do when they suffer an ST elevation MI, and that you should take patients not to the nearest hospital, but to the nearest hospital with an interventional cath lab. There are the hospital staff who implemented rapid response teams to STEMIs so that early stenting could be logistically feasible. If you work in a hospital, you know that's not easy. I know that it takes many, many people and tremendous effort to effect that kind of change. And I felt those people were all with me on that day. The third reason has to do with the subject of the play I was seeing in Seattle, which coincidentally is having its opening night back at the Seattle Rep Theatre tonight. The title of the play is Come From Away. It's a show, that's a Newfoundland expression. It's the show about the planes that landed in Gander, Newfoundland, 38 planes, and the 9,000 people in the town who took care of 9,000 passengers from away for the 5 days until they could fly home. A story about strangers helping strangers. And there I was the next day, a stranger helping a stranger. So when I asked myself, why did I go to Seattle? The obvious answer is to see the play. But I think the real reason I went to Seattle was so that I could be on the return flight and standing at the top of that escalator when that man died. And that is my story.